Okay. Oh, good morning, everyone. I hope you're well. Today is Wednesday. It is the 28th of October, and it's a pleasure to be here. We're getting ready for Parshas Lech Lecha this week. I want to share some Divrei Torah with you that I hope will make the Parsha a bit more meaningful. Some of these items you may have seen before, and some of them may be new. So again, we want to share them. I have it on the screen here just in case someone wasn't able to print out the source sheets. We've got it here on the screen. So let's take a look. We're towards the beginning of Parshas Lech Lecha. Parshas Lech Lecha begins that Hashem has told Avraham and Sarah, at this point their names are still Avram and Sarai, told them to leave their families, leave their familiar area. He's going to send them, he's going to take them to a land. He has not yet told them the name of the place. He has not yet told them much about this other than it's just a place that I'm going to show you. And he has not told him anything about where he is heading. And we're told that soon after arriving in Canaan, that's the land that they are taken to, soon after arriving there, a terrible famine breaks out. So the pasuk says as follows, Yud. So it's in chapter 12, it's Perek Yud Beis, so it's pasuk Yud. The pasuk says, Vayirav ba'aretz, there was a famine in the land, Vayered Avram Mitzrayma. As a result of this famine, Avram goes down to Egypt, Lagur Sham, to sojourn there. That means to temporarily. He never planned on staying in Mitzrayim, staying in Egypt. This was all temporary because of the famine that was striking the land of Canaan. Ki kaved arav ba'aretz, there was a terrible famine in the land of Israel. At that time, the land of Canaan was called. Vayihi kasher Yud Aleph, 11. Vayihi kasher hikriv levo Mitzrayma, and it is as Avraham and Sarai, as they get close to entering Egypt, Vayomer al Sarai ishto, he says to his wife Sarai, no yadati, now I know, ki isha yefas mara'at. I know you're a very beautiful woman, and now it's time we have to think about this before we enter into the land of Egypt, which was not known for its chastity and for people living with the highest moral virtues. So Yud Beis, so 12, Avram says, Vaya ki yeruah sacha Mitzrim, I'm really suspicious that when the Egyptians see you, and they see how beautiful you are, Vamru, and they're going to say, Ishtozos. What's the relationship between these two people who are traveling together? It must be Avram is the husband and Sarai is the wife. So what will they do? They're going to want you because you're so beautiful. Varguosi, as a result, they will kill me. V'osach yichayu, and you they'll allow to live. So what are we going to do about this situation? Yud Gimel, 13. Imri na achosiyat. Here's how we'll deal with this. When that confrontation occurs, do me a favor, just tell everyone that you're my sister. And what will be the result of this? Laman yitav li ba'avurech. Everything will go well for me. V'chaysa nafshi b'glalech. And I'll be able to survive. So this is what the conversation that takes place between Avram and Sarai before they enter Egypt. And it plays out exactly like this, that as they're entering Egypt, the Egyptians see Sarah, they see that she's beautiful, questions are asked, and the result of all this is that she is taken, and she's taken to Paro, where miraculously Hashem intervenes and strikes the Egyptian kingdom and his palace with all sorts of terrible punishment to send the message, it's time to send Sarah back to her husband. And in which case, it's exactly what happens. Sarah is reunited with Avram, and as a result of that, they also walk away from this encounter very wealthy, because Paro has paid Avram and Sarai handsomely for this inconvenience that they've experienced. Now, anyone who studies these 4 psukim, there's $1 million question. In fact, I would say it's a gazillion-dollar question, which really is, what is going on here with Avram? Look what's going on. First of all, there's a discussion in the Rishonim with the early commentators. Was it the right thing to do to leave Israel and go to Egypt because of this famine or not? Well, let's table that discussion. It's a famous machlokas between some of the Rishonim. Ramban is critical. Nachmanides is critical of Avram, this decision to leave Israel. He says they just took a jump of faith, a leap of faith, following Hashem's word to go into the land of Israel, and now there's a famine and he's leaving, and what did he end up doing? It put Sarah at risk. That Ramban is critical of Avram with this. Other Rishonim say, no, he did the right thing. Is that, yeah, God told him go to the land, but now there's a famine there. You can't rely on a miracle. If the place where there's food is in Egypt, it's time to go down to Egypt, and hopefully soon we'll be able to get back to the land of Israel. That's the way many of the other Rishonim approach this. So we're not involving ourselves in that. Let's assume Avram and Sarah did the right thing. Going to Egypt was the right thing to do. What is this plan? Avram says to Sarah, we're about to encounter some problems. We're going into Egypt. I see that this is not a morally chaste place, and we're going to be in trouble here. So I'm asking you a favor, Sarah. Tell everybody who asks, you're my sister, and what's the result of this? I won't get killed, and we'll benefit from this. Well, I'll be able to live, and maybe we'll benefit monetarily. But the million-dollar question is, okay, well, what happens to Sarah in this arrangement? That's great that Avram gets to live, but now they're making this decision Sarah's going to be abducted. She's a married woman. She could be totally violated by these other parties there. What's going on? Why do they think, okay, this is a good plan as they're entering into Egypt here? So this is something that many of our commentators are bothered by. And this week I was looking at the Abarbanel. The Abarbanel, just a brief preface why I looked at the Abarbanel. Abarbanel, as we know, is one of our early commentators, and he needs no approval from me. But very often when you have a good question, when you're studying something in Chumash, Abarbanel is always a great resource to turn to, because the way Abarbanel structures his commentary to Tanakh is he starts with a chapter. Sometimes it might be 2 chapters at a time. And he says, listen, in order to understand this next segment in Tanakh, it could be in Torah, it could be in Nevi'im, in order to claim that you properly understand this next segment, here are the 10, 11, 12, 15 questions that need to be answered. He says it's impossible to claim that you understand this next chapter without answering these number of questions. So I said, let me look what he does at the beginning of Lech Lecha. Let me see if he lines up if this question. He's got to raise this because all the commentators are bothered by this. And let me see what approach Abarbanel might offer for this. And sure enough, I saw that Abarbanel asked this question, and boy, did he ask it in a powerful fashion. So I want to share with you the way that Abarbanel asks this question, and I want to share with you one of the answers he brings down. He's very modest. He doesn't claim it's his own answer. He says this answer, he gives a couple of approaches, but he offers this answer in the name of the Ran, Rabbeinu Nissen. This was a great Sephardic rabbi that preceded him. Look how that Abarbanel asks this question. He has this as question number 13 at the beginning of Lech Lecha. Hashe'ela Yud Gimel. What is the 13th question at the beginning of Lech Lecha? B'maimer Avram l'Sara, that which Avram says to Sarah, v'harguo si, that if once they figure out that we're a husband and wife, they will kill me, v'oscha yichayu, and you they'll allow to live. Imrina chosiat. So therefore he says to Sarah, do me a favor, tell everyone you're my sister. Laman yitav li ba'avurech, so they'll do good to me, and I'll be allowed to live. So look how the Abarbanel asks now at the end of this line. Umi ha'ish, what kind of man, Hamayla, who claims to be a dignified man, sheyivchar b'chayim, would choose, if they're in such a scenario, would choose, let's do something that will allow me to live, in kolon nimratz kazeh, and allowing his wife to be taken in such a great degree of shame. V'yavakesh to'eles, he's going to look to benefit, v'hatava, and to receive some kind of favors, v'yos ishto mizaneh im acherim, allowing his wife to be promiscuous with others. Who would do this? A plain reading of the text, and Rashi alludes to this, and he says, Laman yitav li ba'avurech, doesn't just mean that I'll get to live, because that was the next part of his statement. V'chaysa nafshi b'glalech means I'll be allowed to live. Laman yitav li ba'avurech means we might get some gifts from this. We might profit from this. So the Abarbanel is asking in astonishment, what kind of dignified human being would ask his wife to come up with such an arrangement like this? We see that it's a risk, so just do me a favor. Tell everyone you're my sister. I'll survive, and you'll get passed around in a promiscuous fashion, but we'll profit from this. This sounds disgusting. This sounds abhorrent. How on earth, what kind of man would come up with such a plan? V'yoser ra'oi haya, what would any kind of dignified, chivalrous gentleman do? So v'yoser haya ra'oi, it would have been more proper, sheyivchar b'maves, that Avram should have said, I'll fight to the death. Lebilti asos nevala, that such an abomination shouldn't take place. What's going on here? Avram says, we're going into Egypt. Let's work out this arrangement. It'll allow me to live. We'll profit from this. But what happens to Sarah? She gets passed around in this promiscuous fashion. That's disgusting. And it would have been more expected of a man like of Avram's stature, his dignity, to have said, I'll fight to the death. I'm not going to let this happen. How do we understand this arrangement? So he asks the question, I would say, in a much more powerful fashion than I would have. But it's a powerful, powerful question. So the Barbanel has a couple of approaches. His final approach is the one here that he says in the name of the Ran. And Rabbeinu Nissim, this was a great Sephardic commentator. And I love this approach. I never thought of this. I don't think I had ever heard of this approach before. It totally changes the way we understand what Avraham and Sarah were thinking when they went into Egypt and what they expected to happen. And it'll answer this question. So let's see what the Ran says. He says, Varan Kasav. The way the Ran deals with this question is as follows. That really, Avram was on the ball. Everything he was thinking made sense. He just missed one piece of the puzzle. Well, let's see what happens there. He says, really, Avram was not a disgusting human being. God forbid. He had a very calculated plan. What was his plan? If they are honest when they enter Egypt and they just say, yes, Sarah is my wife, Lo yikavu sarei haaretz v'asganim sheyitna Avram lem bertzono gam shir b'lo maramatan. So if they come straight in and say that Sarah is the wife, there's no way to hope that, that the rulers of the land or any of the officers are going to make any kind of deals with Avraham and to go and take her and offer payment for Sarah and to let it. That's not going to happen. If they come in and they say we're husband and wife, he's dead. So he knows there's no way to survive coming into Egypt saying that we're husband and wife. They're not going to say, okay, well, let us pay you we'll offer you 20 camels and let us have your wife. That's not going to happen. He's dead if he says they're husband and wife. So what's his other option? Avol kashir tomar, if they take the route of saying shiachoso, that they're brother and sister, yikaven, now they could hope, kol echad sheyaskim Avram laseslo liisha alidei matanots v'lo yargu. Now they could hope that all of the officers who encounter them while they're in Egypt will say, oh, you're her brother. This is what happens in the ancient world. Brothers make all sorts of financial arrangements to I don't want to say to sell, but to hand off their sister in marriage to someone who could provide for the family. They might offer 20 camels and donkeys, whatever it may be. So he says, if we come up with this plan and we say that we're brother and sister, now we have a survival route. What's our survival route? Everybody that we encounter will start to come up with all sorts of hopes and plans about how they might come up with enough of a gift to make it worth their while that Sarah could become their wife. Let me just get the place. And now no one dies. All of the Egyptians will think, that's why he brought her to Egypt. That's why Avram, this prince from Canaan, showed up with this beautiful sister of his, because he's looking to marry her off to one of the princes in Egypt. So he's here to test the waters to see who can offer the best dowry for her. Now Avram doesn't have to worry that she's going to get kidnapped. What he's thinking is, if I'm coming, this is what people did all the time. They would come down if they feel that they've got a sister who's worthy for a prince. They'd come down and they'd bargain with all of the local chieftains who's going to offer the best deal for her. So Avram thinks this could buy him some time. Let me come down here and I'll be with my sister, with Sarah, and we'll hold court to see who's going to offer the best of dowry. And if he's able to carry this ruse on for long enough, that he could constantly push him off. Nah, that's not enough camels, not enough donkeys. I want to see what the next sultan has to offer. I want to see what the next prince has to offer. He's hoping he's just going to keep kicking the can down the road. Vim lav, sheyashiv al artso. And if enough time goes by, hopefully that famine in Canaan will end. We'll just be able to go back. So Avram and Sarah's intention when they come in and they start saying, tell everyone you're my sister, what was their hope? Their hope is that we're going to encounter a whole bunch of tough guys and officers. We'll tell everyone, yeah, you're my sister. They'll all think this is the normal thing that happened in the ancient world. People are coming to see what are their prospects, so how much can they get with a dowry. We'll push off this one, push off that one, and keep this going long enough till the famine subsides and we can return to Israel. That was their hope. And there's no doubt this is what they were thinking when they went in. And they went in feeling confident that no one's going to kidnap her, because then they'd be scared of the king. They could get reported to the authorities. If you were to kidnap this guy's sister, he came in to do legitimate business deals, and you kidnap his sister, there's some sense of law and order in Egypt, so he's not worried about that happening. But what did they not take into account? But what Avram never thought would happen was that the king was going to step in and seize her. You never think, we're coming in. It's a big country. Who do I got to worry about? All the little local, mafia bosses. So them I could deal with and say that, okay, this one I'm waiting for a better deal. I want to see what the other offer. And he felt this could buy them enough time until the famine passes and they could return to Israel. What they never thought was the king was going to get involved. That's what he says. Lo ola alev Avram shamelach yichalo leisha. Avol mitzara flogas yafya. But because Sarah was just so beautiful, the matter played itself out in this other path that they never envisioned. And that is when Avram comes to Egypt, and Sarah was in her tent. Some of the Egyptians got a good look at her. And they said to their superior officers, my God, there is a beauty that just came in, someone fit for the king. And then after the next level of officer hears about her, the higher ups hear about her, and they're all thinking like, wow, this is kingly material. We can't get involved. When they saw just how beautiful she was, this is someone fit for the king, but we can't get involved, because once word gets out that a woman who's this beautiful showed up, someone who is kingly material showed up, and we got involved, we're dead. So now what happens is the word passes on to the king. And that's what the pasuk means, that she was praised to Paro. And Paro hears that there's this absolutely stunning woman who showed up. So now he wants to have her as a queen and put a crown on her head. Even though he has no idea who she is, has no idea who her family is. Very similar to what happened in Megillas Esther. That Achashverosh, he doesn't know who Esther is. He doesn't know who her family is. He's just so intrigued by what kind of a stunning woman she is that he decides he wants her to be queen. So that's what happens. That's why she was taken to the house of Paro. It didn't say that Paro took her. What it means is that all the officers realized this is king material, so they brought her. They take her and they bring her to Paro. Klomar el achas me'aminosav. They take her to one of Paro's palaces. Because Paro is going to want to plan this royal wedding where he can officially marry this woman in front of all of his officers and all of his cabinet. And that's what a woman who's going to be a queen, that's the way she should be married. That's how this plays itself out. This answers question 13. So look what the Abarbanel just did there with this Ron. I thought this is a very different suggestion. The question was, what on earth is Avram and Sarah thinking? They enter into this pact. When we come into Egypt, just tell everyone you're my sister. I'll get to live. We'll make some money on the deal. But what happens to Sarah? She's going to get passed around. That's promiscuous. That's disgusting. Avram should have fought to the death to prevent this. So the way he's setting this up is, no, they had a cheshbon. They said this was the calculation. This is the way things worked in the ancient world. People would go and take their sister into a foreign place and they say, I've got this choice sister. Okay, I want to speak with the local chiefs who's going to put in a dowry offer to take her as a wife. So Avram and Sarah are thinking she's not going to get seized. People fear the king. What they're going to do is they're going to create a bidding war, and they'll keep kicking the can down the road. Everyone's going to be offering different dowries, and hopefully enough time will go by that the family will subside and they'll be able to return to Israel. And that was their initial plan. They never planned that she's going to be taken and passed around, God forbid. That wasn't part of their plan. So that's the way. But what went wrong? What happened? What happened was that she was so beautiful that all the different officers start praising her. Word gets to the king. Now the king comes in to seize her and take her and plan a royal wedding. That's how the situation played itself out. But I thought this was such a different approach, and this really helps answer. It helps explain what Avram and Sarah were thinking, and then what went wrong. But otherwise, without this approach, just to look at this, to look at the psukim on the surface, it just looks astonishing. And you have that very powerful question that Barbanel asked: is that who thinks like this? Who would do this? That's a nivala. That's an abomination. Who would do so? Who would come up with such an arrangement? So I thought this was a very interesting approach that Barbanel is offering in the name of the Ran. It really gives us a different way to read the opening psukim in Lech Lecha, and it perhaps gives us an approach to understand these psukim in a way that just doesn't crash on the ears, and it makes a whole lot more sense. I want to share with you something else. Next in the Parsha, not next, but a little bit later in the Parsha, we read about this war that takes place, that there are 4 kings who are very powerful kings, and they've got dominion over 5 kings in the land of Canaan. So again, there are 4 kings who are the ruling entity in the Middle East at that time, and they have dominion, even though they're fewer in number, they're only 4, they have power over these 5 kings in the land of Canaan. One of those 5 kings is the king of Sodom. And Abraham's nephew, that's Sarai's brother, Lot, he chose to live in Sodom after they returned from Egypt. And what happens is this rebellion breaks out, that the 5 kings decide they're going to rebel against the 4 kings, and war takes place. And several years into the war, the 4 kings come in with their forces, and they totally suppress the rebellion. And in the course of doing so, they take captive all of the riches, all of the wealth, as well as all the citizens of those 5 kingdoms, one of them being the people of Sodom. So Avram decides, not that he so much cares about the people of Sodom at this point, but his nephew. He's got family that was just taken hostage. So he puts together a militia of his own, and they go to war against these mighty 4 kings' forces that had just beat the 5 kings. He goes to war against them, successfully pushes them back, and he recaptures he liberates all of the inhabitants of Sodom and gets back all of their storehouses, all of their wealth. As a result of this war, these are these next 2 psukim that we're going to see. So as a result of this war, when Avram is successful, he comes out and here, let's see what it says. Tez Zayin. So it's in chapter 14, it's Perek Yud. So pasuk Tez Zayin, so verse 16. Vayoshev es kol harachush. So Avram restored all of the possessions, and it says, because he was successful in the war, he and his militia beat back those 4 kings and their forces, so he liberated all of the wealth, everything that had been taken. The Gamis Lot Achiv, and he also liberated his nephew Lot, Urechusho Eshiv, and he returned all of his possessions. Gamis Hanashim Vesam, also all the women and all the people who had been taken captive in the war, Avram and his forces liberated everyone. Next verse, 17, Yud Zayin. Vayetze melech Sodom lekraso. So the king of Sodom, who had ran when his forces were overrun, now he's so happy that Avram has liberated his people and all their possessions. The king of Sodom comes out to greet him. Acharei shuvo mehakos es kedar lomer v'esamalachim asher ito. After Avram has succeeded in beating back Kedar Lomer, who was one of the 4 kings, and the others that were with him. And where did they meet up? El Emek Shaveh, they met up at the valley of Shaveh. That's how it's just translated, the valley of Shaveh. And where is that? Hu Emek HaMelech. It's also known as the valley of the king. So let's see Rashi. Rashi's going to share with us, what's this name, Emek Shaveh? So Rashi says, Emek Shaveh, Kach Shemo. That was just the name. Emek was the plain of Shaveh, the valley of Shaveh. Hakshemo ketargumo, like the Targum Unkla says, what does it mean? Lemeshar mafne. He went to a clear plain. That was this valley. It was an Emek Shaveh, it was a clear plain. So what does that mean? Panoi me'ilanos. It didn't have any trees there. It was clear of every tree. We call mechshol. It was just beautiful flat ground. So that's where it was like a staging area, just perfect flat ground. That's where they meet up. Now it also calls it Emek HaMelech, the valley of the king. So what does that mean? So Rashi says, what's Emek HaMelech? He's giving us two pshatim, two explanations. The first pshat, here's his first idea. Beis Risa de Malka. So this is Onkelos says, again, it's Targum. The Aramaic of this is Beis Risa de Malka, the king's race course. Beis Risa Echad, it was one race course. Shu Shloshim Kinim, that was 30 rods long. And it was designed for the king to play there. So it was some kind of stadium-like a setting where the king would either have his races, his chariot races or something. That's what Emek HaMelech, why it was called the Valley of the King. It was a flat ground, and the king had set it up. The Melech Sidom and his Chevra had set this up to be a place where they would have, outside chariot races or whatnot. That's where they would amuse themselves. That's his first shot. Let's see his second shot. Medrash Haggadah, the Medrash says there was more that happened here. It earned the name Emek HaMelech for a different reason. Emek shehushvu sham kol umos. This was the plain, or this was the valley, where all the nations came to a consensus. Shehushvu means they were equal. They all came to a consensus. V'himlichu es Avram aleim. And they decided, Avram, now that we see that God is with you, we want you to be our king. They crowned Avram over them. L'nasi Elokim. We want you to be the Prince of God and as an officer over us. We want you to be the authority in our lives. Now that we see what you accomplished in that war and we see that God was with you, we want you to be in charge of us. So he says the second shot is very different than the first. Emek HaMelech, according to the first, meant this is where the king had his chariot races. This is where they had their parade grounds. This is where they had their circus, whatnot. But the second shot is Emek HaMelech. It's not talking about the king of Sodom. This was the valley where after the war, all the nations, all the locals united, and they decided to make Abraham their leader. And that will explain in Parshas Chaisar when Ephron Achiti says, when he wants to buy the Mars Machpelah, he says, Nesi Elokim ata b'sochenu. You're the Prince of God in our midst. When did Abraham become the Prince of God? So the Medrash says it was at this point. This is when all the locals decided, we want to appoint Avram to be over us, in charge of us. That's a very interesting shot. Second shot Rashi brings down from the Medrash. Let's look at the Medrash, and you'll see the Medrash has a little bit more than what Rashi quoted. So I've got this on the bottom of page 2. Let's see this Medrash. It's in Bereshis Rabbah. The Medrash says as follows. He's going on our pasuk. El Emek Shaveh. What is Emek Shaveh? So he says as follows. A brechia of Rabbi Chanina, b'shem Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman. How do they explain this? Shesham hushvu kol ovdei kochavim. That's where all of the idolaters arrived at a consensus. The katzitzu arazim. They cut down cedars, great trees. Va'asu bima gedola. And they made a tremendous stage. V'hoshivu aso b'tzocho l'mayla. And they sat Abraham on that stage above all the rest of them. And they started to praise him. And they said to him, Shema'inu Adoni. Again, that's the words that show up in Chayisar. That's what Ephron Achiti says when he wants to buy the Mars Machpelah. He says that's when they all start calling him Adoni, our master. Amrulo, they said to him, Melech at Aleinu. Please, we want you to rule over us. Nasiat Aleinu. Be the prince over us. We need a leader. We want you to be our leader. Elokaat Aleinu, be our God. Again, these are a bunch of pagans. So that they want to make him their divine king over them. Amar Lahem, what is Avram's response? Avram doesn't say, wow, my ship just came in. I just hit the jackpot. Avram says, no. Amar Lahem, Al Yechsara Ola Malko. The world is not lacking a king. We already have a king. Let me introduce you to him. He used this as a moment to try to preach monotheism. Avram took this opportunity. He's up on the stage. Everyone's saying, we want you to be our king, our God. He says, the world's not lacking a king. We've got a king up in Shemayim. And we're not lacking a God. There is only one God, the creator. So Avram tries preaching monotheism. Seems like they weren't interested. They wanted a divine man king. Avram says no. So deal's off. That's the way this Medrash seems to leave it. Very interesting medrash, and it tells us more than what Rashi just quoted of him. Rashi gave us a little bit of the story. The medrash here actually has a lot more. Having seen this medrash, I stumbled upon a fascinating observation / comment from the Aznaim LaTorah, Rav Zalman Sorotzkin. It's been a while since we've seen something from Rav Sorotzkin, and I was looking at him and I saw he has a beautiful, beautiful idea on this Rashi and Midrash here. So again, Rav Sorotzkin in his Aznaim LaTorah, one thing that I find fascinating is not just the pshatim that he comes up with, but also sometimes how he finds a way to stick it into 20th century history. Is he has a beautiful pshat based on the Rashi, based on the Medrash, and I'll say this gives us new understanding on how to make sense of some of the events that are unfolding around us. He does this very often. I always find that fascinating, and I found he did that on this piece, and I want to share this with you. So let's see what Rav Sorotzkin does here. He says, Al Emek Shaveh, I'm on page 3, Al Emek Shaveh hu Emek HaMelech, to the plain that was called the plain of Shaveh, or the plain of consensus, which was also known as the plain of the Melech. So Chazal Darshu, so this is, he's quoting Rashi, the second shot of Rashi. Chazal Darshu, Chazal expound on this, Shesham Hushvu Kol Umay Ha'olam. This is where all the nations of the world, idolaters, got together to cut down the trees of Asubima Gedola. They made, this is the Medrash we just read. They made this big stage of Oshivu Oso B'tocho Lamala. They sit Avram all the way up on top of this big stage. And they start calling out before him, Malocha Atalenu, we want you to be our king. Messiah Atalenu, we want you to be our prince. Eloka Atalenu, we want you to be our God. So Rav Sorotzkin now, he hits the pause button on this medrash. We'll come back to the end of the medrash at the end. But he hits the pause button and he says as follows. Nifla Davar, this medrash is absolutely astonishing. Shirak Oz, only then, Acharei Shehika Avram Avinu Samalachim, only after Avram Avinu was successful in his war against the kings, only then Hishvu Kol Umos Olam Lamlicho Aleim. Only then did they say, wow, there's something to this Avram person that we want him to be our leader and to be our king. Avram Moseres Nafsho Alamunaso. Look what Avram's been doing until this point. He's been willing to sacrifice his life in order to sustain his faith Hashem, that there's only one creator, that he's living in this polytheistic world and he's trying to preach monotheism. And people are threatening his very life, but that doesn't impress the world. Ubocher Bekivshan, when he was threatened back in Ur Kastin with being thrown into a fiery furnace, he chose the furnace and he survived that ordeal. But that didn't make everyone say, we want you to be our ruler and we want to follow you. Mishtachavos LeNimrod, when he was put into the test to bow to Nimrod or be thrown into the furnace, he was thrown in. And he was saved. That didn't cause people to say, wow, we want to treat you like a god, like a divine man king. That didn't do it. Avram over Aratzos. Then he leaves Ur Kastin and he starts walking through the lands. And he starts announcing to the world this concept of monotheism, that there's only one God, the creator of all. And that didn't cause anybody to call him a prince of God, even though he's going around the world preaching God's existence. That didn't cause anyone to do it. Avram Notea Eshel, he planted this massive hostel where he was taking care of everyone. Umachil, umashkes ovrim v'shavim. And he would give food and drinks to strangers, everybody who was passing through all the caravans. He was the massive Baal Chesed. But we have no indication that anybody ever stopped to say, wow, we should award him, we should give him a Nobel Prize, we should do something for his contribution to the world. Lo shivo al bima gedola ulekales lefanav, to sit him up on this big stage and to sing his praises. There's nothing. Chazal tell us there's no time in Avram's life where anybody recognized him. Avram oseh mishparut tzedakah. He was the ultimate paragon of showing justice and kindness. No one says we want you to be our king because we want to emulate that. When did the nations of the world finally show Avram a shtickle kavod, finally want to give him a little bit of respect? Masai karu so nasi. When did they call him a prince? Melech, when did they call him a king? Afilu aloka, when were they ready to call him a god? Kasher Heres Kochog Vuraso, when he showed his muscle, Lahakoses Arba Malachim, to beat up on the four kingdoms, Margize Aretz, who were the rulers of the region. Rak Az His Asvu Kol Agoyim. Only then did all of the Goyim arrive at consensus. Ve'emlichu es Avram Avinu Aleim, and decide, we want you to be our king. V'karu so b'chol lashon shel kavod v'aratza, and they give him every expression out there to shower him with honor and shower him with flattery. It was only when they saw, we got a killer. We got someone here this guy's the muscle man. That's what the world all of a sudden showed respect to. Achein, he says, but contrast this, Zuya Sikalagia Shalumos Olam. This is the way that the nations of the world, this is the way that they operate, and this is the way that their minds, this is how they function. Who gets respect? The one who's the muscle man, the one who knows how to beat people up, the big brute. That's who they show respect to. Moshe b'nei Yaakov, look at the contrast. Who do we respect? Who do we respect? Who are our heroes? Moshe b'nei Yaakov mechamdin gaon b'Torah. The descendants of Yaakov, who do we shower respect and adulation on? Someone who's a massive scholar, a gaon b'Torah, b'chassid b'maisim. Someone who's a saint when it comes to their actions, and they know how to act with tzedakah and chesed. That's the person that we emulate and we hold our eyes to, and we say to our kids, we want you to be like him, to be like her, a great tzaddik, a great tzaddikas. That's who we hold up, and that's who we say are our heroes. Kach mechabdin hema. So in contrast, who do the umos ha'olam show kavod to? Es misha mitztayen b'yedei Esav chazakos. Someone who's got the mighty hands of Esav. That's what they know how to respect. V'afilu b'zman hazeh. And he says, this contrast is so noticeable in our times. So you'll see when he's specifically writing this. Lo hikira agudas amim. The agudas amim, this is a way of saying the United Nations, the band of nations. That's what he's saying here. Afilu bizman hazeh, even in our days, lo hikira agudas amim, the band of nations in its entirety, homeres, who they state, they say their stated goal is to abolish war from this world, that there should be no more killing. So when do they, when does the United Nations, when did they finally get to the point that they recognize Israel, as a nation who deserves independence? Ad sheheras nachazaro. It wasn't until the Jewish people showed the power of their fists and the power of their arms. When they took out to the woodshed the 7 invading armies of the Arab world. So he's saying, look at the hypocrisy. Here's the United Nations whose stated purpose is to abolish war from this world. When did they finally come to the realization that Israel has a right to exist? Only after Israel won its wars and beat to a pulp the Arab nations, the United Arab nations that invaded it. So he's saying, my God, you see how this plays itself out in our days. Shisnapulov, the nations that attacked Israel, only when Israel beat them back and was succeeded in a warning, now we say, oh, wow, that's a nation that deserves some independence in some respect. Why? Because they were successful on the battlefield. And he says, and from this we see what was the response of Avram Avinu in that medrash that we saw. What did Avram say after they all said, we want you to be our king, our prince, and our God? Al yechsar olam malkov, al yechsar olam eloko. Our world is not lacking a king. Our world is not lacking a God. Shelo ratzo lekabel alav afilu es toar melech. Avram says, I don't want it. I don't want your titles. Keep them. I don't even want to be called Melech. Granted, I'm not going to be called God because I preach monotheism. I don't even want your title of king. Vilama, why? Since all the pagan nations, they all arrived at a consensus to make Avram their king, nikra melech ha'olam. So the result would be that Avram would be called king of the world. Vein lases toar kazela basar v'dam. There's no human being that should ever be called king of the world. It's just God. God's the king of the world. Aval neged tor nasi lo macha. But the one title that he would not oppose, what's to be called? You want to call me a prince? I'll be called a prince. And that's why you'll find later in Bereshis, that's going to be in Parshas Chaisara, when he's wanting the Maras HaMachpelah, Ephraim says, Nasi Elokim Atav Sochenu. And that Avram doesn't object to. That title he'll accept. And he says this fits well with the Medrash. The Medrash says, the world's not lacking a Melech. I don't want your title Melech. The world's not lacking a God. I don't want your title God. The one title, okay, you want to throw a title at me that I'm not going to wear it put it on my business card, and I'm not hanging up a plaque on my office door calling myself Nasi Elokim, but I'm not going to fight you. You want to call me a Nasi, you want to call me a prince, that I'll take, because a prince, that implies that there's someone greater. A prince is like a secondary position of prominence. You want to call me prince? Okay, I like that idea. You're granting that there's someone greater. Who's greater? I'm going to say it's the creator. It was God. That's how Rav Sorotzkin learns this. But I thought this is beautiful, because look what he does. He looks at Rashi. Rashi was working with this Medrash, and as we saw together, Rashi didn't give us the whole story of the Medrash. He just gave us a piece of it. The Medrash in its whole, it's a much richer narrative that it paints there. And then what does he do with that? He says, look what's going on. Let's think about this Medrash. It's absolutely astounding. It's astonishing. Is that here you could have all the accomplishments of Avraham. He had so much going for him. There were so many things that were so impressive about him. But the pagan world at its time, they don't care about that. The only thing, wow, you were a good fighter. Now we're gonna say we're gonna offer you some respect. That's ridiculous. Look at his other accomplishments. Look at what he was preaching, his monotheism. Look at what he was doing, his chesed. Come on, who cares about that? That's all they respected. They only respected muscle. That was the way that world worked. And we shouldn't think he's saying that our world is so different. Our world's not so different. He says, look at the way the world treats Israel. The only time that Israel is respected is when they're successful on the battlefield. As crazy as that sounds, that's the only time when Israel earns any respect. We could have all these other accomplishments. They could share so many discoveries with the world. They could do all that, but the world is just not capable of recognizing that. The only thing they recognize is, and again, because we're dealing with the world of brutes that are out there, what they recognize is brute strength. So it's on the one hand, I would say that's a bit depressing, because we'll say, okay, but then we have to remember, we're not looking, so to say, for world recognition. If that's what we're looking for, world recognition, okay, be Genghis Khan, and you'll become Alexander the Great. Why was he the Great? Because he conquered the world, so he's Alexander the Great. We don't call him Alexander the Great. We wouldn't give someone the title for that. We call someone's great. They put their mind to work. They were a scholar. They were a Baal Chesed. They acted with kindness towards others. They brought people, they did something for others. That's who we'll call the great, but that's not what the world does. So on the one hand, it's a bit depressing, but on the other hand, it also tells us, don't sit around waiting for the world's adulation. If we're waiting for the world's adulation, there's only one way it's going to come, and we don't want it that way. We don't want to have to be out on the battlefield slaying people. That's not how we want it. So in a certain sense, it's telling us not to wait for the world's adulation, because there's only one way that they're going to recognize it, and that's not something which we view as a Jewish trait. We view that's for Esav. It's necessary sometimes in our national existence to take up arms, but that doesn't define us. That's not who we are. That's not who we are. That's not our defining characteristic. What defines us is we want to be refined, and we want to work towards being an Eved Hashem, a true servant of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, someone who's going to engage in Torah and in mitzvos and do for others. That's what we would call someone who's great. And that's what we praise Avram for. In our tradition, we never look to Avram and say, you know why Avram was so great? Because he was the warrior. We don't look to Avram as that. It was necessary. There was this one point in his life where it was absolutely necessary to go to war to rescue his nephew Lot. And that's what he did. He did what he had to do. But we don't glorify that and say, like, this warrior, this warrior ethos is what we glorify as a people. That's just not who we are. I thought that was a very interesting take on this medrash, and a great observation from Rav Sorotzkin. And I love, again, how he tied it in with events of the 20th century. I'm going to stop the share here. Let me stop the recording.